Imagine this. You've just survived a brutal Ice Age winter. You're huddled with your tribe in a smoky cave, proud that you didn't freeze, starve, or get eaten by something with saber teeth. You think, "We made it." And then someone sneezes. Not a polite little acue. No, this is the prehistoric kind of sneeze. The kind that echoes off stone walls, rattles mammoth bones, and spreads a microscopic apocalypse, faster than you can say, "Pass the roasted root." Welcome to the wonderfully horrifying world of prehistoric diseases. Nature's favorite way of saying, "Nice try, humans." Entire tribes vanished, not because they lost a hunt or ran out of berries, but because of parasites, plagues, and mystery fevers that came with a free side of night sweats. Tonight, as you drift off, I'll guide you through the dark side of prehistory. Don't worry, you're safe. You have central heating, Netflix, and hopefully some hand sanitizer within reach. But our ancestors weren't so lucky. Their immune systems were about as prepared as a caveman at a gluten-free bakery. We'll journey through mysterious pathogens, the stomach-churning parasites that thrived in mammoth steaks, the fevers that spread like gossip at a Stone Age campfire, and the creepy diseases that left behind skeletal clues. And because this is a sleep story, I'll soothe you with descriptions, sprinkle in humor to keep it light, and occasionally remind you, at least you're not trying to fall asleep next to someone with smallpox. So, get comfortable, pull your blanket close, and prepare for a story where coughing was deadlier than cave lions, and itchy rashes were basically prehistoric horror films, minus the popcorn. Close your eyes and imagine a world without Wi-Fi, without door locks, and without the faint, comforting hum of your refrigerator. A world where the scariest notification wasn't a bank charge, but the sound of something growling just beyond the firelight. This was daily life for our prehistoric ancestors. The world was raw, wild, and beautiful, but it was also unforgiving. People lived in small tribes, groups of families bound together, not by Netflix watch parties, but by survival. They hunted, they gathered, they argued about who got the biggest piece of mammoth steak, and they did it all while facing an enemy they couldn't see. Predators were bad enough giant cave lions, saber-toothed cats, and bears so large you'd mistake them for a moving boulder. But invisible killers lurked in every bite of food, every shared blanket, every cough that echoed through a smoky cave. For most of us, we picture prehistoric danger as claws, teeth, and dramatic hunts that either end with triumph or with someone being trampled. But the real terror was often quieter. It was the fever that wouldn't break, the cough that rattled a chest for weeks, the pain in the gut that came after eating something questionable. Long before the word germ was ever uttered, microscopic armies were already waging war inside human bodies. People didn't need to know what bacteria or viruses were to feel their effects. They only knew that sometimes people went to sleep beside the fire and didn't wake up. Daily life in these tribes was already demanding. Imagine starting your day not with coffee, but with the urgent knowledge that you needed to find food, water, and firewood, or you'd freeze and starve. Every chore had survival written all over it. Gathering berries wasn't a cute little hobby. It was literally whether your children ate that night. And yet, even if you managed to keep predators at bay and bellies somewhat full, disease could arrive, like an uninvited guest, at the worst possible time. A scratch from skinning an animal could fester into an infection. A communal drink from a stream could carry parasites that turned stomachs into churning cauldrons of misery. In tribes of only 20 or 30 people, illness spread fast. One sick person meant everyone was exposed. And unlike modern times, where you can DoorDash chicken soup and binge watch while you recover, prehistoric sickness had no safety net. If you couldn't hunt, someone else had to hunt more. If too many people fell ill at once, the tribe was in serious danger. One epidemic could wipe out an entire group in days. Predators didn't have to do anything at all. Sometimes disease did their job for them. There's a grim irony here. Tribes had fire, tools, and clever ways of surviving the wilderness, but they were helpless against a sneeze. Fire scared lions away, but it couldn't scare off a virus. Spears worked well on mammoths, but not on food poisoning. The tribe could spend weeks tracking prey, bring down a beast the size of a bus, and still lose members because the meat wasn't cooked enough. And there was no caveman Gordon Ramsay to shout, "It's raw," and save the day. What makes this invisible war even more fascinating is how tribes likely responded. They didn't know about bacteria, but they knew patterns. If the water from one stream always seemed to make people sick, they avoided it. If eating a certain plant led to days of agony, they remembered that too. Survival was a kind of trial and error science experiment, except the errors could be fatal. Over generations, knowledge accumulated like precious treasure, passed down not in books, but in stories and warnings. Still, there was only so much they could do. A cut from sharpening flint could lead to sepsis. Sharing furs in winter could spread lice, or worse. And the irony of prehistoric life was that the very things that kept them alive, huddling together for warmth, sharing food and shelter, also created perfect conditions for invisible killers to thrive. Togetherness was both salvation and risk. As you picture them sitting around their fires, carving tools, teaching children how to find berries or track deer, remember, at any moment, one cough could ripple through the entire group. Invisible killers didn't need to roar or chase. They simply crept into lungs, guts, and bloodstreams, reshaping human destiny one fever at a time. And in many ways, they were more terrifying than any saber-tooth. At least, with a predator, you had a chance to fight. With disease, you often didn't even know the battle had begun. So how do we know about all this? After all, prehistoric people didn't keep medical charts. There were no doctor's notes scribbled in Latin, no pharmacy receipts to puzzle over. To understand the illnesses of our distant ancestors, scientists have had to play detective, and their evidence comes not from dusty scrolls, but from bones, teeth, and even the dirt those bones were buried in. If this sounds a little grim, don't worry. It's also fascinating, and maybe just a tiny bit funny in a dark way. Because really, imagine a paleontologist saying, "Ah yes, this person died 20,000 years ago, and their molar still has a cavity." Some things never change. Bones are storytellers. They hold secrets long after the flesh is gone. When you look at a prehistoric skeleton, you're not just looking at what someone looked like. You're looking at how they lived, what they ate, and sometimes what killed them. Certain diseases leave very distinctive marks on bones. Tuberculosis, for example, can eat away at the spine, leaving behind unmistakable damage. Syphilis, yes, it goes back that far, can leave holes in the skull. Arthritis leaves joints swollen and misshapen, even in death. These signs are like grim signatures of invisible killers, written in calcium and marrow. Teeth are equally revealing. Cavities, abscesses, and worn-down enamel tell us about prehistoric diets and the infections that followed. A simple toothache today is a trip to the dentist and a lecture about flossing. In prehistory, that same toothache could turn into a lethal infection. Archaeologists have found skulls with abscesses so severe It's hard not to wince just looking at them. Imagine trying to chew raw roots or tough meat while your jaw throbbed from a festering infection. That kind of agony could easily be the end of someone in a world without antibiotics. But bones and teeth are only part of the story. In recent decades, science has taken a wild leap forward. Researchers have learned how to pull tiny fragments of ancient DNA out of bones thousands of years old. This is like hacking into nature's hard drive. Suddenly, they can detect traces of ancient pathogens that once lived inside those bodies. Yes, scientists have found genetic fingerprints of diseases like plague, leprosy, and hepatitis in prehistoric remains. The same illnesses that haunted medieval cities or modern hospitals were already lurking inside human ancestors. The microscopic villains were there all along, playing a very long game. Even cave art may hold hints. While most paintings show animals, hunts, and mysterious handprints, a few researchers believe some markings could represent illnesses. Oddly shaped figures or faces with exaggerated features may not just be art. They could be prehistoric attempts to depict people suffering from disease. Of course, we can't be certain. Maybe it was just a bad hair day, immortalized in ochre. But the possibility that our ancestors tried to draw their own suffering is haunting. It shows that illness wasn't just physical. It left an impression on their culture, their imagination, and their attempts to explain the world. Then there's the dirt itself. Burial sites sometimes contain microscopic remains, parasite eggs, for example. Yes, fossilized worm eggs. Not exactly the glamorous side of archaeology, but definitely informative. Under a microscope, these tiny ovals reveal that prehistoric people were battling intestinal parasites. Imagine coughing up worms or dealing with endless stomach cramps, all while trying to survive in the wilderness. It's not the kind of story you see in movies, but it was their reality. Piecing together all this evidence, we see a picture emerge. Prehistoric humans lived with a constant backdrop of disease. Their bones tell us of long battles with infection. Their DNA whispers of ancient plagues. Their art and burials hint at suffering and attempts to make sense of it. And even their parasites left behind microscopic time capsules of misery. It's strange and sobering to think that while the details of their lives have faded into mystery, their illnesses have outlasted them, etched into their remains for us to read, like grim postcards from the past. And maybe there's comfort in that, because while invisible killers once stalked them, and while diseases reshaped tribes and changed destinies, we've survived. We're here because enough of them endured. Their bones may be cracked and scarred, but their DNA flows in us. And if you've ever had the flu and thought, I can't take this anymore, remember, you've inherited the resilience of people who survived far worse, without medicine, without doctors, without even knowing what a germ was. They didn't just leave behind art and tools. They left behind us. Picture yourself as a hungry hunter-gatherer. You've been tracking a mammoth all day. Your feet ache. Your fur clothing smells like wet dog and campfire smoke. And your stomach sounds like distant thunder. At last, after hours of stalking, the tribe brings the beast down. There's cheering, there's dancing, and soon there's cooking. The air fills with the smell of roasting mammoth meat, and for a moment, life doesn't seem so bad. Except, of course, for the tiny, uninvited guests hiding in that juicy steak. Parasites. Yes, while your ancestors were congratulating themselves for not being trampled to death, they were also about to enjoy a special side dish of intestinal worms. Mammoth meat wasn't always cooked thoroughly, especially when the tribe was starving and patience was thin. And undercooked meat is like an all-you-can-eat buffet for parasites. Worm eggs, larvae, cysts, things so small you wouldn't notice them until they were squirming happily inside your gut. It's one of those little details of prehistory that makes you grateful for your boring modern dinner of microwave leftovers. Trichinella, for example, is a delightful little worm that spreads through undercooked meat. Today, it's associated with pork, but back then, any large animal could carry it. Imagine enjoying a meal, and then, days later, your muscles aching, your eyes swelling, your body turning on itself, because tiny worms have moved in and started setting up shop in your tissues. Prehistoric people wouldn't have known the cause, only that sometimes a feast led to agony. Imagine the disappointment working together for weeks to hunt a mammoth, only for the prize to give half the tribe food poisoning of the squirming variety, and worms were just the start. Tapeworms loved prehistoric dinner tables. These creatures are basically living ribbons that can stretch meters long inside the human intestines. With no Netflix back then, you could argue the tapeworm was the original binge watcher, except its show of choice was your nutrient supply. Archaeologists have actually found evidence of ancient tapeworm eggs preserved in fossilized feces. Yes, scientists study ancient poop, and yes, it tells us a lot. If that sounds like the worst job in the world, remember, someone has to do it, and without them, we'd never know that our ancestors were basically walking worm hotels. Think about it. You might be lying in your cave, your belly feeling oddly empty, despite eating half a mammoth leg. You're weaker, hungrier, thinner, and you don't know why. That's because your parasite roommate has been enjoying every calorie before you could. And, unlike a bear, you can't fight it off with a spear. You can only suffer and hope it passes. Literally. Parasites weren't just physical torment. They also had consequences for tribes. Sick members couldn't hunt or gather effectively. Energy was drained. Children might die from malnutrition, and whole groups could weaken without realizing it wasn't the cold or predators doing the damage, but invisible freeloaders inside their own bellies. Of course, prehistoric humans weren't completely helpless. Over generations, they may have noticed that certain plants or herbs helped. Charcoal, for example, is sometimes found at ancient sites and may have been eaten to soothe stomach issues. Bitter herbs and roots, though disgusting, sometimes expelled worms. Early medicine wasn't glamorous, but it was born out of desperate trial and error, much like trying kombucha today. So the next time you slice into a perfectly cooked steak, remember the struggles of your ancestors. They didn't just battle saber-toothed tigers. They battled tape, measuring worms, living in their intestines. Dinner wasn't always a celebration. It could also be the beginning of weeks of stomach horror. And perhaps, as they lay awake at night clutching their bellies, they wondered which was worse, being eaten by a predator or being eaten from the inside out. Now imagine yourself waking up in a prehistoric camp. The sun rises, mist curls across the valley, and birds sing in the distance. It almost sounds peaceful, doesn't it? But then someone hands you a wooden cup filled with water from the nearby stream, and suddenly, the nightmare begins. Because that shimmering stream, so fresh and lovely, was also the tribe's bathtub, laundry spot, and yes, bathroom. Welcome to the original, multi-use facility. For prehistoric humans, rivers and lakes weren't just sources of hydration. They were also dumping grounds. Animals washed in them, carcasses rotted in them, Humans relieved themselves in them. And yet, people drank straight from the same waters, blissfully unaware of the microscopic terrors they were gulping down. If the mammoth meat didn't get you, the river water surely would. Diarrheal diseases were probably among the most common killers of early humans. That may not sound dramatic compared to being mauled by a saber-tooth, but in reality, it was far deadlier. Dysentery, cholera-like illnesses, and parasites like Giardia thrived in contaminated water. Imagine entire groups weakened, children dehydrated, and adults staggering through daily chores, with stomachs twisted in agony. The silent war of waterborne disease was relentless. Scientists can confirm this nightmare by examining ancient feces and sediments. Yes, again, with the poop, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Under the microscope, eggs of parasites like whipworm and roundworm reveal that dirty water was part of daily life. And if you've ever had food poisoning, you know the misery. Now multiply that by days, weeks, and an absence of modern plumbing. It wasn't just unpleasant, it could kill. And yet, what choice did people have? Water is non-negotiable. You can skip hunting for a day. You can miss out on berries. But water is life. So tribes drank, knowing or at least suspecting that it might make them sick. Maybe they learned to prefer certain springs or moving water instead of stagnant pools. Maybe they noticed that boiling water over fire helped, though fuel was precious and boiling every sip wasn't always realistic. And so, the invisible killers kept flowing, disguised as refreshment. It's strange to think about, but drinking water was one of the most dangerous things our ancestors did each day. More dangerous than chasing prey, more dangerous than exploring new lands. Every sip was a gamble, and when illness spread, it didn't just affect one person. In small groups, everyone shared the same source. If one was sick, all would be sick. Tribes could be decimated without a predator ever stepping foot near them. Even today, echoes of those struggles remain. The human body carries scars of evolutionary battles with waterborne diseases. Our immune systems are shaped by generations who somehow survived wave after wave of microscopic assaults. Some didn't survive, and their lineages ended quietly by a riverbank. Others did, and we are their descendants, drinking bottled water and complaining when it tastes off. So as you sip from your glass tonight, clean and clear and purified, be grateful, because once upon a time, every drink came with a question mark, and often the answer was dysentery. Our ancestors lived in a world where thirst was dangerous, where survival wasn't just about hunting mammoths or outrunning predators, but about trusting that the stream outside the cave wasn't about to betray them. Picture a cold night thousands of years ago. The air outside is sharp enough to freeze your eyelashes, but inside the cave, it's warm with firelight. The family huddles together, wrapped in furs, smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling. Sparks dance, children whisper, someone gnaws on a bone, and then it happens. A sound that even the bravest warrior dreads. A sneeze. Not a little polite sniffle either. A prehistoric sneeze. A blast so mighty, it echoes against stone walls, scattering ash and terrifying the dog. For us today, a sneeze is just a minor inconvenience. You wipe your nose, maybe grumble about allergy season, and move on. But in a prehistoric tribe, one sneeze could be the opening note of a funeral song. Respiratory infections. The great invisible assassins moved like wildfire through these tight-knit groups. With everyone living shoulder to shoulder, sharing blankets, tools, and food, it only took a few days for an illness to spread from one coughing child to every single person gathered around the fire. Imagine the fear, You can fight a lion with spears. You can track a mammoth for days. But how do you fight air? How do you battle something you can't see? A cough in one corner of the cave could mean weakness, fever, and death in another by the end of the week. Archaeologists and paleopathologists, yes, the people who get paid to look at very old bones, have found signs that diseases like tuberculosis were already haunting humans tens of thousands of years ago. TB leaves distinct damage on the spine, creating a bent posture known as Pott's disease. Some prehistoric skeletons show exactly those scars. It means that long before modern hospitals, humans were already coughing themselves into shallow graves. And tuberculosis wasn't the only culprit. Pneumonia, influenza-like viruses, bronchitis, none of these are new. They are as old as humanity's need to gather together. Even the common cold has been around for thousands of years, which makes you feel a little less special the next time you complain about being stuffed up. Somewhere, 20,000 years ago, a caveman was sitting in a corner, sniffling into a piece of fur, feeling equally miserable. What made these infections so deadly for prehistoric people wasn't just the disease itself, it was what came after. A cough that lingered could sap the energy of a hunter, leaving him too weak to chase prey. A mother with a fever might not be able to nurse her child. A small tribe could lose several adults at once, crippling their ability to gather food or defend themselves. In tiny populations, one wave of respiratory illness could erase an entire group from history. And there was no such thing as personal space. Warmth came from closeness, from sleeping side by side, from sharing smoke-filled shelters. Every deep breath drew in more than just fire-scented air. It pulled in droplets, bacteria, and viruses. The cave was a cocoon of safety from predators, but it was also a perfect petri dish for sickness. The symptoms would have been terrifying. Fevers with no explanation, rasping coughs that shook the body, chests tight with fluid, deaths that came suddenly, especially for children and the elderly. And the survivors? They might be left weakened, their lungs scarred, their strength diminished. In the brutal calculus of prehistory, that could mean the difference between surviving a winter and perishing. We even have hints that people tried to make sense of these invisible enemies. Ancient shamans may have linked breath and spirit, seeing sickness as an evil wind inside the chest. They used herbs like thyme and pine resin, burned to clear the air, or inhaled to soothe throats. Whether it worked or not is another question. But the attempt shows that humans recognized the unique dread of the invisible killer in the air. And perhaps humor helped too. Imagine someone sneezing so violently they scared the entire group, and laughter bubbling up, despite the fear. That's the strange thing about humans, we laugh even when danger lurks. Maybe especially then. In that sense, your prehistoric ancestors weren't so different from you, joking about germs they didn't understand, making light of something that could snuff out their lives in days. So the next time you hear someone sneeze across the room and you instinctively tense, remember, that reaction is ancient. It's hardwired into us, passed down from ancestors who sat around fires, clutching furs tighter, and praying that the sound of one sneeze wouldn't turn into the silence of many. If respiratory infections were the silent killers, then skin diseases were the loud, obnoxious neighbors of prehistory. You couldn't ignore them. You couldn't pretend they weren't there. They were written directly on the body: angry rashes, strange lesions, scars that told a story of suffering, even thousands of years later. To look at some prehistoric skeletons is to see a record, not just of bones, but of battles fought on the surface of the skin. Skin is our shield. It's the barrier between us and the outside world. But it's also fragile. One scratch, one bite, one unlucky brush with the wrong plant, and the shield can crack. And once it does, every germ in the environment sees an opportunity. Imagine living in a world where clothing was furs, not breathable fabric, where hygiene was more of a theory than a practice, and where scratching at an itch could turn into a life-threatening infection. That was reality for our ancestors. Archaeologists studying mummies and preserved remains have found skin showing signs of diseases like leprosy and syphilis. These aren't new afflictions, invented in crowded medieval cities. They go way back. Even Neanderthals may have carried them. Bones with disfiguring lesions, skulls with pitted surfaces, skeletons twisted by years of pain. They all whisper of long battles with diseases that marked the skin before crippling the body beneath. And not all skin curses were infections. Some were parasites, lice, fleas, ticks, little creatures that loved living in hair and fur. Entire tribes would have been scratching constantly, their nights filled with the sound of itching. Lice eggs have been found clinging to ancient hair, proof that our ancestors fought the same battles with pests that schoolchildren fight today. Except, prehistoric people didn't have shampoo. They had fingernails, fire, and mutual grooming. Picture a quiet evening around the fire, one person carefully picking through another's hair. Romantic? Maybe. Necessary? Definitely. Then there were rashes from plants. Poison ivy has been tormenting humans for millennia, and while prehistoric people didn't have ointment, they had the same itchy misery. Imagine being covered in painful welts, with no choice but to endure it, trying not to scratch while wolves howled in the distance. The wilderness wasn't just dangerous. It was irritating in ways modern people rarely imagine. Skin infections, once established, could be catastrophic. Without antibiotics, a simple wound could swell, ooze, and spread until it killed. Some skeletons show signs of osteomyelitis, bone infections, that likely started as skin wounds. That means someone might have cut themselves while butchering an animal, only to spend weeks in agony as infection crept into their very bones. A primitive horror show, indeed. And yet, skin diseases weren't just about suffering. They also shaped culture. Shamans may have seen rashes and lesions as marks from the spirit world, signs that someone was chosen or cursed. In some cases, survivors of disfiguring diseases might have been revered, their scars proof of endurance. Imagine a child hearing tales about the warrior with spots on his face who lived through a great sickness. In this way, skin diseases became not just medical conditions, but myths etched onto human memory. Humor surely found its way into this too. People probably joked about each other's endless scratching, about who smelled the worst, about who was cursed by the spirits that week. Laughter was a survival tool as much as fire or spears. When life itched, they scratched, and when scratching hurt, they laughed instead. Even now, archaeologists find eerie echoes. Mummies preserved in ice, with skin still marked by strange rashes. Skulls pitted like the surface of the moon. Hair filled with lice eggs, waiting millennia to be discovered. These traces remind us that disease wasn't invisible. It was visible every day on the skin of loved ones. To live in prehistory was to witness suffering painted in flesh. Tonight, when you feel an itch or notice a mosquito bite, think of those long ago humans. They bore far worse, with no relief but endurance. Their skin told their stories. And we, soft and comfortable in our clean sheets, can only imagine what it was like to live in a time when your body was a billboard for every invisible enemy you couldn't fight off. Imagine walking through a prehistoric swamp at dusk. The air is heavy and wet, filled with the buzzing of unseen insects. The ground squelches beneath your bare feet, every step releasing a smell of mud and rotting vegetation. Somewhere nearby, frogs croak and birds give their last calls before night falls. For a moment, it almost feels serene. But there's danger here, not the kind with claws or teeth, but the kind carried on delicate wings, a faint, high-pitched whine that spells misery. The mosquito. For as long as humans have lived in warm, wet environments, mosquitoes have been our unwanted companions. They aren't impressive predators, but they are effective assassins, and they don't work alone. They are the delivery service for invisible killers, parasites that cause fevers, which lingered, drained, and sometimes destroyed entire groups. Malaria-like illnesses haunted swamps and wetlands, reshaping human history long before the word malaria was ever uttered. Imagine a small tribe settling near a swamp because the water is plentiful, fish are abundant, and plants grow well. It seems perfect. But night after night, the tribe is attacked by clouds of mosquitoes. Not every bite is equal. Some leave only an itch. Others leave behind a parasite that sets up residence inside the blood. And once it's there, the nightmare begins. The fever doesn't always strike immediately. It creeps in days later. A hunter wakes sweating in the night, shivering despite the warm air. His body shakes, his teeth chatter, and then hours later the fever breaks, leaving him drenched and exhausted. The next day, he feels almost normal, but weaker. Then, the cycle repeats. Days of fever, days of chills, a rhythm of misery that doesn't stop. For the tribe, this is devastating. A sick hunter can't run. A fevered mother can't gather food. Children struck by it may not survive at all. Archaeologists and geneticists have pieced together evidence of these ancient fevers. DNA studies show that genes protecting against malaria, like the famous sickle cell trait, developed tens of thousands of years ago. That means malaria-like illnesses were tormenting humans long before recorded history. The very shape of our blood cells today carries echoes of battles fought with parasites thousands of years ago. And the skeletons whisper too. Enlarged spleens, signs of anemia, stunted growth. These are the marks left by repeated bouts of fever. Ancient bones tell us that entire generations lived with the lingering weight of these illnesses. They didn't just survive predators and starvation. They endured endless cycles of heat, sweat, and exhaustion that must have made every day feel like climbing a mountain. The fevers also shaped human choices. People may have learned to avoid certain swamps or to settle in breezier highlands where mosquitoes were fewer. They may have lit smoky fires at night, not just for warmth or predators, but to drive away the biting insects. Every decision of where to camp, how to sleep, and what plants to burn was influenced by the buzzing threat that never went away. It's strange to think that some of the most powerful predators in prehistory weren't giant cats or massive bears, but tiny parasites hitching rides in mosquitoes. They had no claws, no fangs, no roars. They conquered through exhaustion, through relentless fever, through the slow erosion of strength. The hunters could outwit mammoths, but they could not outwit a bite no bigger than a pinprick. Humor, of course, must have found its place. Perhaps someone joked about the swamp's revenge, or teased a friend who scratched endlessly at bites. Laughter was medicine when nothing else worked. But still, the dread lingered. The fever that returned again and again. The invisible monster that haunted warm nights. buzzing just beyond the firelight. Even today, malaria remains one of humanity's oldest enemies, responsible for countless deaths each year. But its story begins long before hospitals and statistics. It begins in the swamps, where our ancestors once tried to build lives, only to be undone by the fever that lingered. Their suffering is written in our DNA, in our blood, and in the quiet knowledge that sometimes the smallest creatures wage the deadliest wars. Now imagine another scene. A campfire glows in the twilight, and beside it lies a dog, curled up and dozing. A few goats wander nearby, bleating softly, while pigs snuffle at scraps. It sounds almost cozy, doesn't it? The beginnings of something familiar. Humans weren't just hunting anymore, they were living with animals. They were domesticating them, forming bonds, creating relationships that went beyond predator and prey. Dogs became companions. Goats provided milk. Pigs offered food. It was a brilliant survival strategy, but it came with a hidden price. When you live with animals, you share more than warmth and resources. You share their diseases. This was the beginning of what scientists call zoonotic diseases, illnesses that cross from animals into humans, the plague of animal crossovers. Today we know that many of our worst diseases, from smallpox to influenza, came from animals. Back then, our ancestors didn't know that cuddling a dog or keeping goats nearby could invite invisible killers into their lives. But the evidence suggests it happened again and again, reshaping human destiny in ways no one around those fires could have predicted. Consider pigs. They're intelligent, hardy, and tasty. But they also carried viruses that could leap into human bodies. The close quarters of early camps, with humans and pigs sharing space, created perfect conditions for pathogens to experiment. A cough from a pig, a sneeze from a human, somewhere in that exchange, a virus found a new home. Goats and sheep weren't innocent either. They brought milk and meat, but also diseases like brucellosis, a bacterial infection that causes fevers, sweats, and long-term misery. Archaeological evidence shows that early pastoral communities bore the scars of these crossovers, with skeletons showing signs of chronic illness that likely came from living cheek by jowl with livestock. And then there were dogs, humanity's best friends. They offered protection, companionship, and hunting help. But dogs also carried parasites, fleas, and potentially rabies-like viruses. Imagine the horror of a hunter bitten by his own sick dog, the wound festering, madness following. Yet despite the risks, humans kept dogs close. Love, it seems, outweighed the dangers even in prehistory. The problem was simple. Humans had no immunity. Every new crossover hit them like a storm. Small groups might lose half their members to a single outbreak. And once a disease took hold in humans, it could smolder, reappear, and spread again. Invisible bridges between species were crossed over campfires, in shared shelters, in the daily intimacy of living alongside creatures that were both allies and risks. And yet, without these relationships, survival might not have been possible. Dogs helped track game. Goats and sheep gave steady supplies of food. Pigs grew fat quickly. The benefits were enormous, and so humans accepted the trade. They endured the crossovers, adapted, and in some cases, evolved new defenses. Our immune systems today are battle-scarred veterans of those ancient wars. There must have been humor too. Someone probably joked that the pigs were trying to kill them, or that goats had evil breath. In laughter, They softened the terror of diseases they couldn't understand. They didn't know about microbes or viruses, but they knew that living with animals brought both gifts and curses. When you look at it this way, domestication wasn't just a step toward civilization. It was a step toward epidemics. The plagues that would one day sweep cities and empires had their roots in these quiet fireside camps, where humans and animals first shared their lives and their germs. It was the price of progress, paid in fevers, sores, and silent deaths. Tonight, as your cat curls up beside you, or your dog snores at your feet, remember this deep history. These bonds are ancient, written in tens of thousands of years of companionship. But also remember, our ancestors didn't just inherit love and loyalty from animals. They inherited plagues. And somehow, despite it all, they survived. When we think about prehistoric dangers, our minds tend to wander toward dramatic images. A mammoth charging across a frozen plain, a cave lion leaping from the shadows, or maybe a rival tribe wielding sharp spears. Rarely do we think of whispered secrets passed around the campfire, or the uncomfortable reality that even in the Stone Age, intimacy carried risks. Yet, tucked away in the fossil record and the DNA of pathogens, there are hints that sexually transmitted diseases, those so-called social diseases, were part of human history long before cities, brothels, or scandalous Roman feasts. It might not sound like the most glamorous topic to drift off to sleep with, but stay with me. Because this story is as old as humanity itself, a quiet undercurrent running beneath the grand tales of hunts and migrations. Prehistoric people had fewer distractions than we do. No phones, no streaming platforms, no crossword puzzles. Social bonds were their entertainment, and those bonds sometimes grew close, very close. And closeness, as it turns out, is a perfect vehicle for pathogens. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons have found eerie evidence of diseases like syphilis etched into the very bones of our ancestors. Syphilis, in its late stages, can leave devastating marks on the skull pitting, cratering, and reshaping bone until it looks as though it has been gnawed from the inside. Some remains dating back thousands of years show exactly these signs. Now, debates rage among scientists about when syphilis truly emerged. Was it carried across oceans by explorers, or was it haunting humans long before Columbus? Whatever the answer, it's clear that STDs are no modern invention. They were lurking in the shadows of intimacy long before history was written. And syphilis wasn't alone. Gonorrhea, the so-called clap, has a history so ancient that some biologists suggest it may have followed humanity out of Africa. It doesn't mark bones in the same dramatic way, so its trail is harder to follow. But genetic studies of the bacteria suggest that it has been with us for millennia. Imagine a tribe, small and tightly knit, where a single infection could move through the entire group with startling speed. Unlike parasites in meat or fevers in swamps, these infections spread through whispers and touch, through bonds that were supposed to unite, but instead, sometimes destroyed. It must have been confusing for early humans. A cut from a spear could be seen, a cough could be heard, but a disease passed through intimacy was invisible. Symptoms appeared days or weeks later, and no one knew why. Perhaps they thought it was a curse, punishment from spirits, or the consequence of breaking some unspoken rule. Theories sprouted like weeds in the absence of knowledge. And yet, despite the misery they caused, these social diseases tell us something about the lives of prehistoric people. They remind us that our ancestors weren't just hunters and gatherers. They were human In every way we are capable of love, of longing, of mistakes. They formed relationships, sought comfort in each other, and sometimes paid a price. Diseases thrived because people cared enough to be close, to share not just food and fire, but themselves. There's an odd humor to it too, if you tilt your head just right. Imagine a prehistoric gossip circle, whispers about who has the bad spirits, or who brought back more than just mammoth meat from that trip to the neighboring camp. Maybe laughter softened the fear, even as people scratched at unexplained sores or limped with pains they couldn't name. Because if there's one thing humans have always done, it's find humor in discomfort, even when the discomfort is intimate. Today, we treat STDs with antibiotics, awkward clinic visits, and stern pamphlets. But thousands of years ago, there was no escape. These diseases shaped communities, changed fates, and likely even influenced migration. A sick tribe might move in search of healing waters. A shaman might prescribe strange rituals. And slowly, in the background, pathogens spread as surely as stories. So while it may feel a little strange to think about, remember this: the struggles we face today are ancient. There is nothing new about the diseases that ride the currents of human closeness. They are shadows that have walked beside us since the very beginning, reminders that every strength has a weakness, every bond carries risk, and even love itself is sometimes dangerous. Now let's turn to something a little closer to home, something every one of us can understand. Toothache. That sharp, throbbing pain that seems to radiate through your skull, the kind that keeps you up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what you did to deserve it. Now imagine that same agony, but you're living 20,000 years ago in a cave, with no dentists, no numbing gel, no emergency appointment where someone pokes at your molars with sharp tools. Just you, your pain, and maybe a friend with a rock who offers to help. Teeth are time capsules. They survive long after flesh and bone have crumbled, and they carry within them the scars of ancient suffering. Archaeologists have found prehistoric skulls with cavities so deep they look like craters on the moon. They've found abscesses that ate into jaws, leaving holes that would have caused agony beyond words. And here's the terrifying part: a simple toothache could kill. In the modern world, a cavity is a nuisance. Left untreated, it can cause infection. Sure, but usually we catch it in time. In prehistory, a cavity was a death sentence waiting to happen. Once infection took hold, it could spread into the jaw, into the bloodstream, and eventually into the brain. Without antibiotics, there was nothing to stop it. People likely died not from dramatic hunts or epic battles, but from a single rotten tooth. The causes were many. Prehistoric diets weren't sugary like ours, but they weren't perfect either. Roots, tubers, and grains could lodge in teeth and rot, slowly eroding enamel. And chewing tough meat wore teeth down to the roots, exposing nerves to bacteria. By middle age, if you could call it that, when life expectancy was short, many prehistoric people had mouths full of pain, and the pain must have been constant. Imagine trying to chew tough venison with an infected molar. Imagine waking every night with your jaw pounding like a drum, unable to find relief. Imagine the smell, because yes, abscesses and rot leave behind odors no one could ignore. In a small tribe, everyone would know who had the bad tooth, even if they pretended not to mention it. Sometimes, though, our ancestors fought back. Archaeologists have found teeth that show signs of primitive dentistry, scratches that suggest someone tried to scrape away decay, holes that looked like they were drilled with stone tools, even traces of plant fibers, packed in cavities like prehistoric fillings. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and if you think a dentist's drill today is bad, imagine a flint blade wielded by your cousin in the flickering firelight. Despite the horror, there's also something deeply human here. Pain shared is pain halved. Maybe a tribe gathered around someone moaning with toothache, offering herbs, warmth, or distraction. Maybe they laughed gently at the grumpy elder who snapped at everyone because his jaw was on fire. Humor softens even the worst misery, and toothache, universal and relentless, surely inspired its share of jokes. But the consequences were real. A hunter unable to chew was weaker. A mother, too sick from infection, couldn't care for her children. Tribes had to adapt, to feed the sick, to endure the losses. Dental doom was a constant reminder that even the smallest flaw could tip the balance of survival. Today, we brush, floss, and complain about the dentist's bill. But deep down, the fear of toothache lingers. It's in our stories, in our metaphors, in our jokes. And maybe tonight, as you lie in bed, you'll feel a flicker of gratitude that you live in a world where pain can be numbed, infections cured, and teeth saved. Because thousands of years ago, your ancestors weren't so lucky. For them, a toothache wasn't just pain, it was the whisper of death at the edge of every smile. Picture a small band of people huddled around a fire, maybe 20, maybe 30 in total. A few children playing with sticks, a couple of hunters sharpening tools, elders telling stories that carry the weight of memory. Everyone knows everyone. Every cough, every laugh, every frown is familiar. It feels safe, this closeness. But that safety is fragile. Because in groups this small, when sickness arrived, it didn't just knock on the door, it kicked it open and moved in. One of the great tragedies of prehistory was that epidemics didn't need to be massive to devastate. In a tribe of a few dozen people, a single illness could cut the population in half. When you live in a city of millions, even a deadly flu can be absorbed. But when you live in a tribe the size of a classroom, every life matters. Every adult is a hunter, a gatherer, a protector, a teacher. Losing even a few could send the whole group spiraling toward collapse. Imagine a child with a fever. Their small body shakes, their face flushes, and the worried mother tries to soothe them with herbs or cool water. But soon, the father coughs, then the grandmother, then the hunters, who can no longer walk the miles needed to track game. Within days, the whole fire circle is weak. Food piles run low. Fires go out because no one has the strength to fetch wood. And the predators lurking outside never even have to lift a claw. Disease does the hunting for them. Unlike today, where new babies are born into thriving hospitals, prehistoric tribes had no buffer against loss. If 5 adults died, it wasn't just 5 people, it was 5 skill sets, 5 providers, 5 voices in the songs that kept spirits alive. Knowledge vanished with them. How to find the best hunting grounds, which plants healed, how to carve a tool just right. If the wrong people fell ill, the tribe could never recover that wisdom. And then there was reproduction. In tiny groups, the number of potential partners was already dangerously low. When epidemics struck, not only did they cut down the present, they jeopardized the future. A tribe might find itself with too few healthy adults to repopulate. Inbreeding increased, and genetic problems compounded. Scientists studying ancient DNA see echoes of these bottlenecks. times when human numbers dipped so low that our survival was balanced on a knife's edge. It's sobering to realize how easily entire lineages vanished. A small epidemic might flare in one valley, wiping out a tribe, leaving only silence where laughter once echoed. No one would record it. No monuments marked the loss, just an abandoned campsite, a scattering of bones, and stories cut short. Multiply that by millennia, and you understand why some branches of the human family tree never grew. There must have been a kind of haunted fear in those times. Every cough was a reminder of what could come. Every fever could mean the unraveling of a whole people. Yet somehow, humans endured. Tribes split and reformed. Survivors wandered, joined others, passed on their knowledge. Entire groups may have been lost, but humanity as a whole found ways to adapt. Still, the price was steep. We are the descendants, not of everyone who lived back then, but of the lucky few who made it through waves of invisible terror. When you look at the world today, full of billions of people, remember that we were once so close to disappearing that one bad winter, one unlucky epidemic, might have erased us entirely. And in those moments, the predators outside the cave weren't the real danger. The true hunter was already inside, past in coughs and touches, unseen and unstoppable. Close your eyes and imagine sitting in a cave with your tribe. The fire burns low, the air thick with smoke. Damp hides cover the ground, and the walls glisten with moisture. At first, it's just another winter night. But then your nose catches something else, something sour, something heavy, the smell of sickness. We don't think about it much today because modern medicine and fresh air have softened the experience. But in the tight, enclosed shelters of prehistory, illness didn't just spread, it announced itself in every sense. You could hear it in the coughs, see it in the sweat, and most of all, smell it. Fever leaves a sour, acrid scent on the skin, a mix of sweat and waste products as the body burns hot. Vomiting filled the air with a stench that clung to clothing and furs. Infected wounds oozed, and the odor of rot mingled with smoke. Even the breath of the sick could turn foul, heavy with infection, so that sitting too close to someone might literally make you gag. For prehistoric people, these smells were signals, warnings, proof that invisible forces were at work. Now picture a small cave filled with 30 people. There are no windows, no chimneys, just a smoky hole where firelight flickers. The air is already thick. Add sickness, and it becomes suffocating. Every cough sprays droplets into that stale space. Every touch spreads invisible killers. The smell isn't just unpleasant, it's part of the spread. People packed together, breathing the same sour air, inhaling sickness with every lungful. It must have been terrifying and unforgettable. Children whimpering in feverish sleep, the stench of unwashed bodies mixing with sickness, elders whispering prayers to unseen spirits. Shamans tried to cleanse the air with burning herbs, sage or pine resin, filling the space with sharp smoke. Maybe it helped, maybe it didn't, but at least it masked the odor of suffering. And yet, there was no escape. The outside world was too cold, too dangerous. Inside, the smell of sickness became the soundtrack of survival. People huddled together because they had to, knowing that closeness brought both comfort and contagion. Scientists who study ancient remains sometimes find chemical traces on bones and in soils that hint at diseases. But the sensory reality, the choking air, the oppressive stench, those don't fossilize. Still, we can imagine them. We know what infected wounds smell like. We know how sweat builds in fever. Multiply that by an entire tribe locked together in a cave for weeks, and you understand why disease spread so ruthlessly. The smell of sickness was also the smell of fear. It was the reminder that something was wrong, something that could not be fought with stone or fire, and it lingered long after. Even when people recovered, their bedding reeked, their shelters held the ghost of illness. In a way, caves carried memories, not just of paintings and fires, but of epidemics, soaked into their walls. And yet, people lived through it. They endured the stench, the closeness, the invisible spread. Maybe they laughed when someone coughed dramatically, or joked about who smelled the worst. Humor, again, softened fear. But deep down, everyone knew that once the smell of sickness filled the cave, survival was no longer guaranteed. So tonight, in your clean sheets, with fresh air, and maybe a candle burning nearby, be grateful. Grateful that the scent surrounding you is one of comfort, not despair. Because for thousands of years, your ancestors drifted off to sleep in places where every breath carried both warmth and risk, and the smell of sickness was as much a part of life as the fire that kept them alive. Imagine lying on the damp ground of a cave, fever burning in your body, stomach cramping, head pounding. You have no doctor to call, no pharmacy, no miracle pill tucked in a bathroom cabinet. What you do have is your tribe, a fire, and a desperate hope that the world around you holds something that can soothe the pain. This was the medical landscape of prehistory. Not hospitals and antibiotics, but a long, stumbling experiment with whatever plants, rocks, or animal parts seemed promising. It was medicine of desperation. There's something both bleak and beautiful about that. Prehistoric humans didn't have microscopes to see germs, or even the concept of infection. But they had observation. They had memory. They noticed that chewing certain leaves made the pain in a tooth fade, or that a bitter root helped a stomach settle. They discovered that burned wood charcoal, when swallowed, sometimes stopped poison from wreaking havoc. They didn't know it worked by binding toxins, the way modern medicine now explains it. They just knew that sometimes, miraculously, it seemed to help. Picture a sick child lying listless, eyes glazed. The mother chews up an herb, spits it into a paste, and rubs it on the child's gums. Does it help? Maybe, maybe not. But it is an act of love, and in that act, there is a kind of healing, even if the body doesn't always respond. Medicine was as much about hope as it was about results. And hope, in a dark and dangerous world, was medicine in itself. Charcoal was one of the earliest remedies. Archaeologists have found evidence that prehistoric people intentionally ate charcoal, not just as accidental ash in food. They may have noticed that it helped after eating something poisonous. Today, activated charcoal is still used in emergencies for certain toxins, proving that sometimes desperation stumbled into truth. Imagine the scene: a hunter vomiting after eating a suspicious mushroom, while an elder hands him blackened chunks from the fire. It seems ridiculous, chewing on soot, but if it saved even one life, the story would spread, and soon the whole tribe knew. Herbs, too, were part of this accidental pharmacy. Willow bark contains salicin, the chemical ancestor of aspirin, and prehistoric people almost certainly chewed it for pain relief. Imagine someone with a pounding headache gnawing on a strip of bark, grimacing at the bitterness, and slowly realizing the ache was fading. Over time, patterns formed. Bitter plants often had power. Strong smells sometimes healed, or at least gave the illusion of healing. From minty leaves to pungent roots, the forest was both grocery and pharmacy. Of course, not every experiment ended well. For every soothing root, there was a toxic berry. For every calming leaf, there was a hallucinogenic one. Picture the poor soul who tried the wrong mushroom, the entire tribe watching nervously as he claimed to see mammoths dancing in the firelight. Medicine and poison were separated only by trial and error was often fatal. And then there were the chewing sticks. Long before toothbrushes, people cleaned their teeth with twigs, fraying the ends and rubbing them over gums. But those same sticks doubled as medicine. Certain woods had antiseptic qualities, easing infections in the mouth. Others, perhaps, did nothing at all, except provide distraction from the pain. Still, distraction is sometimes enough. Even today, when you suck on a cough drop, part of the relief comes from the ritual, the act, the sense of doing something. That was true in caves and huts as well. Desperation medicine wasn't glamorous. It didn't always work, but it was rooted in the human refusal to simply accept suffering. They tried, they tested, they remembered. And across thousands of years, these fumbling experiments built the foundation of modern medicine. The pills in your cabinet, the antibiotics in hospitals, they all trace back to someone chewing a root and noticing it helped, or someone daring to eat blackened wood to fight a poison. There's humor in it too. Imagine a tribe gathering around as someone insists that chewing on a foul-smelling weed cures stomach aches. Half the tribe refuses, the other half tries it, and by morning, only a few feel better. See, the man says proudly, it works. It was science, by stubbornness, by storytelling, by faith. But sometimes, stubbornness and faith were enough to keep humanity alive another day. So when you take your pain reliever tonight, or sip a cup of herbal tea for your throat, remember that you are participating in a chain of healing that stretches back into the deep dark of prehistory. Medicine began not with laboratories, but with desperation, with hope, with chewing on sticks and swallowing ash. And somehow, despite all the failures and bitter tastes, it was enough. In the world of prehistory, where every shadow might hide danger and every sickness seemed to come from nowhere, the tribe needed more than food and fire. They needed someone who could make sense of the chaos, someone who could bridge the gap between the visible and invisible. Enter the shaman, the healer, the mystic, the person who stood at the crossroads of medicine and magic. Shamans were not doctors in the way we know them, but they filled a vital role. When someone grew ill, the tribe needed more than herbs. They needed meaning. They needed reassurance that the fever had a cause, that the cough had an explanation, that suffering was not random. And so the shaman stepped forward with chants, smoke, painted symbols, and the authority of someone who claimed to understand what others could not. Picture a sick hunter lying by the fire, coughing, sweat pouring from his body. The shaman arrives, carrying a bundle of herbs, bones, and feathers. The tribe watches silently as the shaman chants, waves smoke over the body, shakes a rattle to scare away the evil spirit. From a modern perspective, it may look like nonsense. But from within that cave, it was powerful. It gave the sick man comfort. It gave the tribe hope. And sometimes, through the strange magic of the human mind, it even worked. This is what we now call the placebo effect, the remarkable power of belief to ease suffering. If a patient believes a treatment will help, their body sometimes responds as if it has. Endorphins release. Stress eases. The immune system rallies. Shamans were unknowingly harnessing this effect, long before scientists gave it a name. The chanting, the rituals, the herbs they created, a performance that convinced the patient and the tribe that healing was underway. And in some cases, that belief made the difference between despair and recovery. Of course, shamans weren't all smoke and mirrors. Many combined ritual with real remedies: charcoal, willow bark, bitter herbs. But wrapped in ceremony, the effect was magnified. A child might refuse to chew a bitter root, but if the shaman declared it sacred and fed it with chants, the child swallowed. The ritual made medicine palatable. Literally and psychologically, shamans also acted as keepers of knowledge. In societies with no writing, healing practices had to be remembered and passed down. The shaman became the memory of the tribe, the library of herbs and cures. They were the ones who knew which plant healed wounds and which berry killed, who had seen what worked before and carried that knowledge into the future. They wore the authority of experience, even if they dressed it in feathers and paint. But healing was not just physical. Sickness terrified tribes. It threatened survival. Shamans soothed that terror by providing explanations. Maybe the illness was caused by an angry spirit, or by breaking a taboo. Maybe it was the breath of an ancestor, reminding the tribe of forgotten rituals. These stories weren't scientific, but they gave shape to fear. And when fear is shaped, it becomes bearable. The tribe could act, offer sacrifices, chant, gather herbs, rather than collapse into helplessness. There's humor in this too. Imagine the shaman performing an elaborate dance, covered in paint and bones, only to trip over a log. The tribe stifles laughter, not wanting to offend the spirits, but later jokes quietly about the healer who nearly cursed himself. Humans have always laughed at authority, even sacred authority, and surely shamans endured their share of whispered jokes. Yet when fear pressed in, no one laughed. They were the anchors in the storm. It's easy to dismiss shamans as frauds, but that would be unfair. They did what humans always do. They found meaning where there was none, created rituals to soothe, and used belief as a tool of survival. Even today, our modern medicine still relies on the placebo effect, still acknowledges that comfort and confidence matter. In that sense, the shaman still walks among us, dressed not in feathers, but in lab coats, speaking not of spirits, but of probabilities. So when you close your eyes tonight, imagine the flickering firelight of a cave, the rhythmic chanting, the smell of smoke and herbs. Imagine the shaman's voice, weaving hope into the darkness. It may not have banished disease, but it kept despair at bay. And sometimes, in a world balanced on survival, that was healing enough. Imagine yourself in a prehistoric camp. The fire crackles, the air smells of smoke and damp hides, and the usual murmur of voices has gone quiet. A child coughs in the shadows, a wet, rattling sound that no one wants to hear. People exchange uneasy glances because they know what this might mean. Illness has crept in, invisible and dangerous. And in a world where survival was already hanging by a thread, one sick body could become the spark that consumed everyone. So the question arises, what did they do? Did our distant ancestors invent the idea of quarantine? There is no carved stone record, no neat inscription that says, "Day 3 of coughing, we moved him outside." But archaeologists and anthropologists have pieced together clues, hints that prehistoric humans may have practiced early forms of isolation. It wasn't quarantine in the modern sense, with hospital wards and yellow tape, but something rawer, harsher, born of desperation. Sometimes, survival required distance, even from loved ones. Evidence suggests that some skeletons from tens of thousands of years ago were found buried away from others, sometimes with signs of chronic disease. Tuberculosis, leprosy-like infections, or skeletal deformities marked them as different. Why were they separated? Did the tribe fear contagion? Or did they honor them with solitary burials because of their suffering? The truth is murky, but the possibility is there. Perhaps the first quarantines were as old as humanity itself. It's not hard to imagine. A group of 30 people, all living shoulder to shoulder in a cave, couldn't afford for one infection to spread unchecked. They may have moved the sick to the mouth of the cave, closer to the cold air, but farther from the children. They may have built shelters outside, crude lean-tos, where the ill could rest. It would have been both an act of protection and of cruelty. To exile someone sick was to increase their suffering, but to keep them inside was to risk everyone. And yet, human compassion complicates the picture. Even in harsh conditions, we see evidence that prehistoric people cared for their ill. Skeletons of individuals with severe disabilities, people who could not have survived alone, show that they were tended for years. They were fed, kept warm, helped along. That means tribes balanced fear with love. Perhaps isolation was used only when absolutely necessary, when the danger was too great to ignore. There's something almost modern about that dilemma. We still wrestle with it today, how to balance care for the sick with protection of the community. During plagues, during pandemics, the question is the same. Prehistoric people, without science, must have relied on observation. If every time a fever spread through the camp, it ended in disaster, perhaps they drew the grim conclusion: distance could save lives. Humor, of course, may have been part of coping. Imagine a cranky elder complaining as he's shuffled to the edge of camp. Fine, I'll live with the wolves then. See if they appreciate me more. Maybe people laughed nervously, easing the guilt of sending someone away, because guilt must have been heavy. To isolate a loved one was to risk never seeing them again. It was to choose survival over closeness, protection over comfort. The first quarantines weren't written down, but they were felt in every cough, in every whisper of fear. They remind us that even in the distant past, humans were grappling with the same terrible choices we face today. To protect the many, sometimes the few were left apart. It is both heartbreaking and profoundly human. If quarantine is about separation, then zombie bones are about resilience. Not zombies in the Hollywood sense, no arms reaching out of graves, no groaning hordes chasing you across the savannah. These zombies were people who lived through illness again and again, their bones carrying the scars of survival. When archaeologists talk about zombie bones, they mean skeletons that tell stories of repeated infections, healed wounds, and bodies that refuse to give up. Take a long look at an ancient femur or skull, and you may see pitting, thickened ridges, or odd lumps. These are not decorations. They are the signatures of disease and healing. A tibia thickened from repeated stress, a jawbone marked by an abscess that drained and closed, a spine twisted by tuberculosis, yet still functional. Each mark is a message. This person lived through suffering. They carried disease, endured it, and kept going. In a way, these bones are time capsules of toughness. They show us that prehistoric people weren't fragile victims of their world. They were survivors. One skeleton of a Neanderthal, found in Iraq, had injuries so severe, a missing arm, damaged eye, crippled leg, that it was clear he lived for years, despite them. Others show signs of infections that healed, meaning the body fought back and won. These individuals were, in the most literal sense, Ancient zombies. Sick, scarred, but alive. Imagine what that survival looked like. Someone with a festering wound, limping, still dragging themselves to gather food. Someone with a chronic infection, ribs aching, still sitting by the fire, teaching children how to shape flint. Every healed scar was proof of resilience, proof of a community that did not abandon them. Because survival wasn't just about the body's fight, it was about others helping, feeding, sheltering, and keeping hope alive. The infections themselves leave gruesome evidence. Osteomyelitis, an infection of the bone, leaves holes and ridges that can still be seen today. Syphilis, tuberculosis, and leprosy etch their signatures in skulls and spines. Healed fractures show that even broken bones were not the end. If the tribe could care for you long enough, you could become a living archive of pain and perseverance. It's almost comforting, in a strange way, when you get sick today and complain about your body betraying you. Remember, your ancestors carried infections that scarred their very skeletons, and they still lived on. They were, quite literally, walking monuments to endurance. Humor softens this image too. Maybe tribes joked about their toughest members, calling them cursed or unkillable. Imagine someone coughing violently by the fire, only to grin and croak. Not dead yet. That grim humor echoes, even now. We still laugh at our own survival, still make jokes about catching every cold and bouncing back. That impulse is ancient. Zombie bones tell us more than stories of survival. They reveal the deep roots of compassion. Because for someone to live long enough to heal from repeated infections, they needed help. They needed food brought to them, fire kept close, predators kept away. They needed patience from others who could have chosen to abandon them. So when we look at these scarred skeletons, we aren't just seeing individual toughness. We're seeing community, care, and the stubborn refusal to let someone go. The scars etched into those bones are humanity's oldest victory trophies. They say, I suffered, I endured, I lived, and perhaps, in the flickering firelight of their last nights, those ancient survivors knew that their pain had meaning. Because survival wasn't just about them, it was about keeping the tribe strong, keeping stories alive, keeping hope burning. Picture a line of weary figures crossing a windswept plain. Their furs are patched, their belongings strapped to their backs, children trudging behind with sticks to poke at the snow. This was migration in the prehistoric world. Not planes, trains, or moving trucks, but feet pounding earth, one step at a time. When food ran out, when winters grew too harsh, or when rival groups claimed the best valleys, people moved. They wandered rivers, forests, deserts, and with every mile, they didn't just carry spears, fire, and dreams of survival. They carried diseases. It's an image we don't always consider. We imagine migrations as heroic adventures, new lands, new discoveries, the thrill of exploration. But each body in that line was a walking vessel of bacteria, parasites, and viruses. Some were obvious, the coughing elder at the back of the line, wheezing like a broken bellows. Some were hidden, the parasites nestled quietly in a child's gut, or a virus lurking, waiting for the right moment to erupt in fevers. When tribes wandered, they weren't just spreading their language and tools. They were spreading invisible hitchhikers that clung to them like shadows. This mattered more than we might think. Prehistoric tribes were small, and diseases often burned through them quickly, leaving survivors immune or dead. But when survivors moved and met new groups, they brought pathogens to populations with no immunity. Imagine a band of 30 arriving at a new valley where another band of 20 already lives. They trade stories, food, maybe mates, but within days, the newcomers' sniffles spread, and suddenly half the resident group is sick with something their bodies had never known. One handshake, one kiss, one shared piece of roasted meat was enough. Archaeologists can't find viruses in the soil as easily as they find bones, but genetic studies reveal the footprints of these migrations. Many human pathogens show patterns that trace back to ancient movements. The herpes virus, for instance, is so deeply embedded in human populations that it almost certainly followed us out of Africa, step for step. Parasites like lice and worms diversified as we did, evolving alongside our migrations. In a way, the pathogens were explorers too, hitching rides in skin, guts, and lungs, colonizing new lands as their human hosts wandered. And think about how this shaped encounters. When two groups met, the immediate question wasn't just, will they share food, or will they fight us? It was also, unknowingly, will they survive our germs, or will we survive theirs? Prehistoric alliances could crumble under the weight of invisible enemies, just as wars could start over visible ones. A tribe weakened by illness was vulnerable, easy prey for rivals, or forced to abandon territory they could no longer defend. There's humor in this too, if you squint. Imagine a grand migration, painted in epic style. Our people crossed mountains, rivers, deserts, and then, behind the grand speech, someone mutters, "Yes, and we also crossed with worms." The noble tale of human wandering is always accompanied by the less glamorous truth of stomach cramps and coughs. Even in their greatest moments, our ancestors weren't alone. They were followed by an entourage of microbes. Over time, these traveling pathogens shaped human genetics and culture. Tribes that survived exposure to new diseases became stronger, their immune systems more versatile. Those that didn't faded into obscurity, their valleys and caves reclaimed by silence. In this way, migration wasn't just about spreading humans across the world. It was about spreading germs, testing bodies, and writing resilience into the DNA of survivors. So the next time you think about your distant ancestors trekking across icy tundras or tropical forests, remember the invisible caravan that moved with them. They didn't just carry fire and hope. They carried disease, and in doing so, they spread not only themselves, but the very biological battleground that would shape humanity forever. Now imagine you're lying under furs at night, your body trembling with fever. You're not sure if you'll wake in the morning. Around you, the tribe sleeps fitfully, each person wrapped in their own battle with illness. Some will not survive, but if you do, if your body fights back, you'll emerge changed, stronger, hardened, and the memory of that fight will echo not only in you, but in your children. This is the evolutionary twist of disease, the strange bargain where suffering in the past bought resilience for the future. Human immunity wasn't born in clean houses with doctors nearby. It was forged in caves, huts, and swamps, hammered into us by the endless pressure of germs. Every fever that didn't kill us taught our bodies a lesson. Every rash, cough, and parasite was a test, and those who passed carried scars, but also defenses. Over thousands of years, these battles shaped the very genes that flow in our veins today. Take sickle cell trait, for instance. It's a mutation in blood cells that can be harmful in its extreme form, but in regions plagued by malaria, it gave protection. People with the trait were more likely to survive the fever that haunted swamps, and so the trait endured, passed on generation after generation. In this way, a disease sculpted our very biology. Our DNA carries the fingerprints of illnesses long gone, proof of an arms race between humans and microbes. Other examples are everywhere. Certain immune system genes became common because they helped fight infections like leprosy or plague. Even our tolerance for lactose, our ability to digest milk as adults, was shaped by the pathogens we faced. Drinking milk from animals was risky, but those who adapted gained nutrition that strengthened them against disease. What looks like a dietary quirk is actually a survival story, etched into our chromosomes. The irony is that many of the weaknesses we suffer today are the flip side of these ancient bargains. Autoimmune diseases, allergies, even some genetic disorders can be traced back to adaptations against infections. In trying to outwit microbes, our bodies sometimes overcorrected, creating vulnerabilities of their own. It's as if our immune systems are battle-scarred veterans, still jumpy from centuries of war. And yet, without these wars, we wouldn't be here. Imagine the countless tribes erased by pathogens, their stories never told. Those who survived weren't the strongest hunters or the cleverest toolmakers, but often simply those whose bodies had the right quirks. Survival wasn't fair. It wasn't noble. It was biology, rolling dice with genes. And we are the improbable result. There's humor in this too, in a dark way. Imagine a prehistoric elder proudly pointing to a child and saying, "He survived 3 fevers this winter. He's a keeper." Bragging rights weren't about grades or trophies, but about whose immune system had the most grit. Survival was the ultimate accolade, and immunity the hidden prize. Modern science confirms what those ancient survivors lived. That disease is not just an enemy, but a teacher. It has shaped us, molded us, and continues to challenge us. Every sneeze, every vaccination, every antibody in your blood is part of a story that began long before history was written. It's the story of survival through suffering, of evolution twisting itself into knots to keep humanity alive. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, take a quiet moment to thank your ancestors, the ones who sweated through endless fevers, who bore rashes and coughs, who endured parasites and pain. Their bodies paid the price. Their genes carried the victories, and those victories live on in you. You are, in every sense, the product of countless unseen battles. The evolutionary twist of disease is that while it nearly killed us, it also made us who we are. It's easy to picture disease as only a villain. Fevers that wrung bodies dry, parasites that turned stomachs into battlegrounds, coughs that stole breath in the middle of the night. And yet, if we step back from the immediate misery, there's something else hidden in this grim story, a silver lining. Because diseases didn't just torture our ancestors, they also sharpened them. They acted as relentless trainers, pushing humanity to adapt, to innovate, to grow tougher, and, in strange ways, even smarter. Imagine a tribe faced with endless waves of sickness. Children fall ill, elders wheeze, hunters cough themselves too weak to chase game. It sounds like a tragedy, and it was, but it was also a crucible. Only those with certain strength survived. Stronger immune systems, bodies that could withstand repeated assaults, minds quick enough to notice which herbs soothed or which waters killed. Over time, these strengths weren't accidents. They became inheritance. Survival didn't just shape who lived that winter. It shaped who we are now. Take the constant parade of childhood illnesses. For prehistoric kids, life was already a gauntlet of dangers. Snakes, falls, hungry predators, Add in waves of fevers, rashes, and stomach parasites, and every child who reached adulthood was hardened by fire. Each illness was a test. Some didn't pass, but those who did emerged stronger, their bodies carrying immune memory like secret weapons. That resilience wasn't wasted. It was passed on to their children. In this way, generations grew tougher, layer by painful layer. And it wasn't just biology. Diseases pushed humans to think. Imagine a group noticing that smoke-filled huts seemed to protect against mosquitoes, or that bitter plants eased stomach cramps, or that moving camp reduced outbreaks. Each observation was knowledge carved out of suffering. Each bit of knowledge made survival slightly more likely. In this way, disease wasn't just an enemy, it was a teacher, forcing people to pay attention, to make connections, to pass on wisdom. Some scientists even suggest that repeated plagues pushed humans to develop stronger social bonds. When sickness struck, individuals alone rarely survived. It was the group that carried them, feeding the weak, tending fires, watching over the ill. Those who cooperated lived. Those who didn't vanished. Out of this came empathy, compassion, and systems of care. Disease forced humans to care for one another, and in doing so, it made us more human. There's irony here too, a kind of dark humor. Diseases wiped out tribes, yet they also sculpted intelligence, empathy, and culture. Without the constant presence of invisible killers, maybe humanity would have remained simpler, less innovative, more complacent. Pain is a cruel teacher, but it is an effective one. Every cough, every scar, every desperate remedy was a lesson that sharpened the species. Even the act of storytelling, the very thing you're listening to now, may owe something to disease. Imagine a sick child, too weak to leave the hut. An elder sits by the fire, telling stories to soothe, to distract, to explain why suffering exists. Over time, these stories became traditions, myths, the beginnings of culture. In comforting the sick, humans created art. Out of fever and pain came narrative, meaning, and imagination. So the silver lining is not just that diseases made humans tougher. They also made humans think harder, feel deeper, and cling to each other tighter. They honed our immune systems, yes, but also our societies, our empathy, and our creativity. Every bit of toughness you carry in your cells, every instinct to laugh when life hurts, every story told to soften fear, it's all part of the inheritance shaped by millennia of disease. Now the firelight fades, and our long journey through prehistoric illness comes to its end. We've wandered through swamps buzzing with mosquitoes, caves filled with coughs, and kitchens of desperation, where charcoal was medicine and chewing sticks passed for dentistry. We've met shamans rattling bones, tribes splitting under the weight of epidemics, and survivors whose very skeletons carry the scars of pain. And somehow, despite it all, humanity endured. Which brings us to you, lying in your warm bed, drifting into sleep. If nothing else, I hope this story leaves you with a sense of gratitude. Gratitude that when you sneeze tonight, you can reach for tissues, instead of having the whole campfire you like a ticking bomb. Gratitude that if you wake with a fever, you have medicine in a cabinet, or at least NyQuil, to knock you out and make your dreams interesting. Gratitude that your biggest dental nightmare is a stern hygienist telling you to floss more, not an abscess that could kill you before spring thaw. Imagine, for a moment, what your ancestors would think of your world. Heated homes, clean water, antibiotics, vaccines, toothbrushes that buzz as if they're possessed. They would see it as magic. They would see your bed as a throne, your blanket as armor, your orange-flavored cough syrup as a potion of immortality. And in a way, they'd be right. Compared to them, you live like royalty. Of course, disease hasn't vanished. The invisible killers still lurk. We still face plagues and pandemics. But the difference is that we are no longer helpless. We understand germs. We have tools to fight back. We have knowledge carved out of centuries of suffering. And every time you take a pill, sip clean water, or sleep without fear of lice crawling through your hair, you are reaping the rewards of battles fought long before you were born. It's funny, in a dark way, to think that all the horrors, the worms, the rashes, the fevers that lingered, were not just misery. They were the price paid, so you could lie here tonight, safe, warm, and alive. You are the heir to resilience. Every ancestor who survived passed their strength forward, and here you are, cozy in your sheets, not a mammoth carcass in sight. So as you close your eyes, let yourself feel the contrast, from caves filled with the smell of sickness to bedrooms filled with lavender candles, from chewing on sticks to pharmacy aisles with endless choices, from prayers whispered to shamans to prescriptions scribbled in neat handwriting. The world is still dangerous, but never before has it been so kind to those who fall ill. Take a deep breath. Let the quiet hum of your room replace the coughs and cries of the past. Let the comfort of your bed remind you how far humanity has come. And let sleep take you, not as an escape, but as a small act of gratitude. Gratitude for ancestors who endured what you'll never have to. And gratitude for the miracle of a night where the only thing you need to survive is rest. And that brings us to the end of tonight's journey through the shadows of prehistory. Close your eyes now, sink into the warmth of your blankets, and let your mind drift into deep, restful sleep. You've earned it. If you're still awake, your adventure isn't over. Just click one of the 2 videos glowing on your screen and keep exploring with me. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll always have a story waiting when the night feels too long. Sleep well, dream deeply, and I'll see you in the next tale. Good night.